A millionaire dismissed a woman scientist as irrelevant. When her breakthrough invention went public, he regretted saying anything. The sprawling conference room of Statham Enterprises was a testament to the millionaire's affluence and power. The polished marble floors gleamed under the warm lighting of the chandeliers, and the walls were adorned with minimalist art pieces that whispered sophistication. At the center of the room, a long mahogany table stretched, surrounded by executives dressed in impeccable suits, their postures rigid, their gazes sharp. Dr. Lila Brooks stood at the far end of the room, gripping the clicker in her hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She had rehearsed this presentation countless times, refining every slide, every word. But now, faced with the unyielding gaze of Richard Statham and the indifferent faces of his board members, her confidence faltered. Lila clicked to the next slide, revealing a graph that showed potential energy savings in bold, clear numbers. "Mr. Statham, this isn't just a project," she began, her voice steady but carrying an undertone of urgency. "It's a paradigm shift. If implemented, this technology has the potential to reduce global energy costs by 30% and cut emissions on a scale we've never seen before." Statham, seated at the head of the table, leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of his face. His sharp blue eyes bore into her, not with interest, but with an air of skepticism. He was a man accustomed to winning, to control, and most importantly, to immediate results. Patience was not a virtue he cared to entertain. "Dr. Brooks," he said finally, his tone measured but cutting, "we've been funding this so-called paradigm shift for over a year now. And yet, all I see are projections and promises. Meanwhile, our competitors are delivering results that are boosting their stock prices, not draining resources." Lila swallowed hard, feeling the weight of every eye in the room fixed on her. "These aren't just promises," she countered, her tone firmer now. "Theoretical breakthroughs are the foundation of practical innovation. Without foundational research, there would be no Edison, no Tesla." "Spare me the lecture," Statham interrupted, his voice cold and dismissive. Edison and Tesla weren't managing companies with quarterly reports and shareholder expectations. They also didn't ask for millions to fund unproven technology. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Lila glanced at the faces around her, hoping for a glimmer of support, but found only indifference or poorly concealed pity. She took a breath, steadying herself. She hadn't spent years in a lab, sacrificing personal relationships and financial stability, just to be dismissed so easily. "Mr. Statham," she began again, her voice tinged with the frustration she tried to suppress. "This technology isn't unproven. We're on the cusp of something revolutionary. With just a little more time. Time is a luxury this company doesn't have." Statham's words cut through the air like a blade. He rose from his seat, his tailored suit impeccable, his movements deliberate. "Effective immediately, funding for this project is terminated." Lila's breath caught in her throat. She blinked, as though trying to process what he had just said. "Terminated?" she repeated, her voice almost a whisper. Statham's expression didn't waver. "Terminated," he confirmed, his tone devoid of empathy. "And as for you, Dr. Brooks, your services are no longer required." For a moment, the room seemed to tilt around her. The words hung in the air, each one a blow to the years she had dedicated to her work, to her belief in something bigger than herself. "You're firing me?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly despite her best efforts to remain composed. Statham gave her a faint, dismissive smile. "This isn't personal. It's business." The finality in his tone left no room for argument. Lila felt a surge of anger rise in her chest, fueled by the sting of humiliation and the injustice of it all. But she forced herself to remain calm, to meet his gaze without flinching. "You'll regret this," she said quietly, each word deliberate. The corner of Statham's mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. "Regret is for people without options," he replied, turning his attention to his tablet as if the conversation were already over. "Good luck, Dr. Brooks." The words were a dismissal in every sense of the term. Lila placed the clicker on the table, straightened her shoulders, and walked out of the room. The sound of her heels echoed in the silence. a stark contrast to the murmur that broke out as soon as she left. As she stepped into the hallway, the oppressive weight of the boardroom lifted, replaced by a different kind of heaviness. She had spent years crafting not just a career, but a vision, one that had just been deemed irrelevant by the man who held the power to bring it to life. Her heart ached with the loss, but beneath the ache was a flicker of defiance. She made her way to her office, collecting her few personal items, a photograph of her parents, a small potted plant, and a framed certificate commemorating her first patent. Each item felt heavier than it should, a tangible reminder of the dreams she had built within these walls. As she exited the building for the last time, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bustling city street. Lila stood on the curb, gripping the box of her belongings, watching the endless stream of people hurrying by. She felt an odd mix of emotions: grief, anger, and, most surprisingly, resolve. Richard Statham might have dismissed her as irrelevant, but Lila knew better. Her work wasn't just an idea, it was the future. And if he couldn't see that, she would show him. Show the world that brilliance couldn't be silenced by a boardroom vote. She hailed a cab, her mind already racing with possibilities. There were other ways, other avenues to pursue. And deep down, she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. What would you do if you were in Lila's shoes, facing a dismissal like that? Let us know in the comments below. And hey, if you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. The cab ride home was a blur. Lila sat in the back seat, the small cardboard box of her belongings on her lap, her eyes fixed on the passing cityscape. The towering buildings and bustling streets of the financial district seemed to mock her, each shining glass window a reminder of the world she had been ejected from. She replayed the events of the boardroom in her mind, the sting of Statham's words cutting deeper with each recollection. Terminated. Irrelevant. The terms felt like a brand, but she refused to let them define her. The driver pulled up in front of her modest brownstone apartment, a stark contrast to the grandeur of the Statham Enterprises headquarters. Lila thanked him quietly, paid her fare, and stepped onto the cracked sidewalk. As she climbed the steps to her front door, the weight of the day began to settle over her like a heavy cloak. Inside, the familiar warmth of her home greeted her, but even that felt different now. She set the box down on the kitchen counter and stared at its contents, simple mementos of a career she had thought would define her life. The framed certificate caught her eye. Patent awarded to Dr. Lila Brooks. It read in crisp black lettering. The sight of it stirred something in her, a reminder of the tenacity and brilliance that had carried her this far. As the evening light filtered through the window, casting long shadows on the walls, Lila reached for her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she needed: Amy Hudson. Amy was a fellow scientist and one of the few people Lila trusted implicitly. They had been lab partners during their doctoral program, and while their paths had diverged, Amy into academia and Lila into corporate research, their bond had never wavered. Lila hesitated for a moment, then pressed the call button. Amy picked up on the second ring. Lila? Hey, what's up? The sound of her friend's voice was a balm to her frayed nerves. Amy, I need to talk, Lila said, her voice steady but edged with the weight of the day. Are you free tonight? Of course. What happened? You sound... Amy paused, searching for the right word. Off. I'll explain when I get there, Lila said. I just need to get out of my head for a bit. Come over. I'll open a bottle of wine. Half an hour later, Lila was seated in Amy's cozy living room, a glass of red wine in her hand. The room was cluttered in the way only a scientist's space could be, papers and books stacked precariously on every available surface, an anatomical model of a cell on the coffee table. The sight of it made Lila smile, a small comfort in an otherwise dismal day. So, Amy said, settling into the armchair opposite her. What's going on? Lila took a deep breath, then launched into the story. She told Amy everything. Statham's dismissal, the shutdown of her project, the crushing realization that years of work had been swept aside without a second thought. By the time she finished, Amy's expression had shifted from disbelief to anger. That bastard, Amy said, shaking her head. I always knew Statham was a short-sighted egomaniac, but this? Terminating a project with that much potential? He doesn't deserve the breakthroughs you were going to deliver. Lila managed a faint smile at her friend's indignation. Well, it doesn't matter now. I'm out. And without the resources Statham was providing, there's no way I can continue the work on my own. Amy's brows knit together in thought. What exactly were you working on? Lila hesitated, then leaned forward, setting her glass down on the table. A new energy conversion system. It's a hybrid technology that uses nanophotonic materials to dramatically increase efficiency in solar energy capture. The initial tests showed promise. Real promise? But the development costs were substantial. Amy's eyes widened. Lila, that could change everything. I know, Lila said quietly. That's why I can't let it die. But without funding, I'm stuck. Amy's gaze sharpened, a familiar glint of determination in her eyes. Then we find you funding. Lila laughed bitterly. It's not that simple. I've already been blacklisted by Statham, and his influence reaches far. Who's going to back a dismissed scientist with an unfinished project? Amy leaned back, swirling her wine thoughtfully. You'd be surprised. There are people out there who care about innovation, not just profits. Let me make some calls. I have a few contacts who might be interested in something like this. Lila stared at her friend, gratitude swelling in her chest. You do that? Of course, Amy said with a shrug. This is bigger than Statham's ego. If you're right about this tech, and I know you are, it deserves a chance to see the light of day. The conversation shifted after that, but the fire Amy had ignited within Lila didn't fade. By the time Lila left, the night air crisp and cool against her skin, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She didn't have Statham's resources, but she had something just as valuable, her unshakable belief in her invention. The next morning, Lila set up a makeshift workspace in her apartment. It wasn't much, just a desk cluttered with papers and a laptop balanced precariously on a stack of books. But it was a start. She spent hours refining her calculations, reaching out to former colleagues, and researching potential investors. Every rejection she received stung, but each one fueled her resolve to keep going. Then, 2 weeks after her dismissal, Lila received an email that changed everything. The sender was anonymous, the subject line simple. I believe in your work. The message was brief but clear. Someone had taken notice of her efforts and wanted to meet. Attached was an invitation to a private dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. The sender signed off with a single initial, R. Lila's heart raced as she reread the message. It could be a scam or an opportunistic competitor looking to steal her ideas. But it could also be the chance she desperately needed. She typed her response quickly, her hands trembling slightly as she hit send. I'll be there. As she leaned back in her chair, the faintest smile crossed her lips. She didn't know who R was or what they wanted, but one thing was certain. She wasn't giving up. Not now, not ever. The private dining room of the upscale restaurant exuded elegance, with its low lighting, rich mahogany furnishings, and a centerpiece of fresh orchids. Lila Brooks sat at a polished table set with fine china, her nerves a tight coil as she waited for her mysterious benefactor. Her invitation had included no details beyond the initials R and a promise to discuss her work. The stakes couldn't be higher. This meeting might determine whether her invention lived or died. The door opened, and a tall figure entered. The man was in his mid-50s, with a commanding presence and an air of understated confidence. His tailored gray suit was impeccable, and his sharp hazel eyes held an intensity that made Lila straighten in her seat. Dr. Brooks, he said, extending a hand. I'm Robert Kingston. Thank you for agreeing to meet me. Lila stood, shaking his hand firmly. Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Kingston. Though I must admit, I'm curious how you found me. Kingston offered a faint smile as he took a seat across from her. Good work speaks for itself, Dr. Brooks. And I make it my business to find people who are pushing boundaries. I read your research paper on nanophotonic materials last year. It was ahead of its time. When I heard about your dismissal from Statham Enterprises, I knew I had to step in. Lila blinked, surprised by his candor. You've been following my work? Closely, Kingston confirmed. Your technology has the potential to revolutionize the energy sector. I'd like to help you see it through. The waiter entered, momentarily interrupting their conversation as he poured wine and presented the menu. Kingston waved off the formalities, his focus unwavering. Please, order whatever you'd like. Lila barely glanced at the menu, her mind racing. Mr. Kingston, I appreciate your interest, but I have to ask, what's in it for you? He leaned back, studying her for a moment before responding. I'm a venture capitalist, Dr. Brooks, but not the kind chasing quick profits. I invest in ideas that can change the world. Your invention aligns with everything I believe in: sustainability, innovation, and progress. If you succeed, it's not just good for my portfolio. It's good for humanity. His words carried a sincerity that caught Lila off guard. For the first time since her dismissal, she felt a glimmer of hope. What exactly are you proposing? I'll provide the funding you need to complete your research and bring your prototype to life, Kingston said. In exchange, I'll take a minority equity stake in your intellectual property. You retain control, and I'll help connect you with the right people to ensure this technology reaches its full potential. The offer was more than Lila could have dreamed of, but she knew better than to jump at the first opportunity without caution. What's the catch? She asked, her tone careful. Kingston chuckled. No catch, Dr. Brooks. Just one condition: absolute transparency. I'll need to see your progress regularly and have a say in any major decisions involving commercialization. Lila considered his words, weighing the risks against the opportunity. After a pause, she extended her hand. You've got a deal. The handshake felt like the closing of one chapter and the start of another. Over the next hour, they discussed logistics, with Kingston promising to set up a state-of-the-art lab space and assemble a team to support her efforts. By the time Lila left the restaurant, the weight that had been pressing on her chest for weeks had begun to lift. 3 weeks later, Lila found herself in a sleek research facility housed in an unassuming building on the city's outskirts. The lab was a dream, equipped with cutting-edge tools, a dedicated team of technicians, and an endless supply of materials. Kingston had delivered on every promise, and Lila wasted no time diving back into her work. Her invention was based on a hybrid technology that combined nanophotonic materials with adaptive energy conversion systems. The core concept revolved around harvesting light at wavelengths traditional solar panels couldn't capture, thereby increasing efficiency exponentially. Theoretically, it was a game changer. Practically, it was a challenge of monumental proportions. Days in the lab blurred into nights, the passage of time marked only by the steady hum of machines and the scribble of notes on white boards. Lila's team, handpicked by Kingston, quickly proved their worth. There was Daniel, a meticulous engineer with an eye for detail, and Priya, a computational physicist whose modeling expertise saved weeks of trial and error. Together, they formed a cohesive unit, united by a shared belief in the project's potential. One evening, after hours of testing, Daniel approached Lila with a grim expression. "We've hit a snag," he said, pointing to a chart on his tablet. "The energy output is plateauing. No matter how we adjust the parameters, we can't seem to break past 70% efficiency." Lila frowned, her mind racing through possibilities. "It has to be the material composition," she said, pulling up a set of data. "The nanophotonic layers are too thin to sustain optimal energy transfer. We need to reinforce them without compromising flexibility. That'll mean starting over with the fabrication process," Priya pointed out, her tone cautious. "It could set us back weeks." Lila nodded, her jaw tightening. "Then we'll start over. This isn't about hitting a deadline. It's about getting it right." Her determination was infectious, and the team threw themselves into the challenge with renewed vigor. They worked late into the night, experimenting with different material combinations and refining their designs. Lila led by example, her focus unwavering despite the setbacks. One particularly grueling night, as Lila sat alone in the lab reviewing data, Kingston arrived unannounced. He carried 2 cups of coffee and set one down beside her. "How's it going?" he asked, his voice warm. "Slow," Lila admitted, sipping the coffee. "We're making progress, but it's not as fast as I'd like." Kingston smiled faintly. "Innovation rarely is. But from what I've seen, you're on the right track. Keep at it." His encouragement bolstered her spirits, and over the next few weeks, breakthroughs began to emerge. The team discovered a new composite material that significantly improved energy transfer, pushing efficiency beyond their original projections. The prototype, once a collection of theoretical designs, began to take physical shape. Finally, after months of relentless work, the day arrived for the first full-scale test. The team gathered around the prototype, a sleek, compact system housed in a transparent casing. Lila's heart raced as she initiated the sequence, watching as the system hummed to life. The display screen showed the energy output climbing steadily, surpassing the 70% barrier and continuing to rise. When the numbers stabilized at 92% efficiency, the room erupted in cheers. Lila allowed herself a rare moment of celebration, the culmination of years of effort finally within reach. As she stood back, watching her team revel in the success, Lila felt a deep sense of vindication. She had been cast aside by Statham, but here, in this lab, surrounded by people who believed in her vision, she had proven that brilliance couldn't be silenced. But the journey was far from over. The world still didn't know about her invention, and Statham was unaware of the storm that was brewing. Lila knew that when her work went public, it wouldn't just be a technological breakthrough. It would be a reckoning. Lila Brooks adjusted the microphone clipped to her blazer, her pulse quickening as the murmurs of the audience settled into silence. She stood on a stage at the prestigious Global Tech Summit, her invention's sleek prototype displayed behind her in a glass case. The summit was a gathering of the brightest minds and most influential investors in technology, and this moment was her debut, not just as a scientist, but as an innovator prepared to change the world. "Good afternoon," Lila began, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "What you see behind me is the future of energy, a hybrid technology that harnesses the full spectrum of sunlight, achieving efficiencies we once thought impossible." Her words hung in the air as the audience leaned in, intrigued. With practiced precision, she delved into the science, explaining how her nanophotonic materials captured wavelengths beyond the capabilities of traditional solar panels, converting even diffuse sunlight into usable energy. The room was silent, captivated not only by her innovation but by her quiet conviction. "Imagine," she concluded, her gaze sweeping the crowd, "a world where clean, affordable energy isn't a privilege, but a standard. That's the world we can create together." As the audience erupted into applause, Lila stepped back, allowing the panelists to inspect the prototype more closely. The response was electric. Investors exchanged excited whispers, journalists jotted down notes furiously, and scientists lined up to ask her questions. For the first time since her dismissal from Statham Enterprises, Lila felt the vindication she had craved. But beneath her satisfaction lingered a sharp edge of defiance. This wasn't just about success. It was about proving her worth in a world that had tried to silence her. The days following the summit were a whirlwind. Lila's phone rang constantly, with calls from media outlets requesting interviews, venture capitalists eager to invest, and government agencies curious about the implications of her technology. Robert Kingston, true to his word, helped her navigate the deluge, ensuring that she maintained control over her invention's trajectory. "You're the talk of the industry," he told her during a late-night meeting in his office. "But this is where it gets tricky. Everyone wants a piece of this technology, and not all of them have your vision for its potential." Lila nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. "I'm not letting this become just another profit-driven product. This is bigger than that." "Good," Kingston said, a note of approval in his voice. "Because the next few months are going to be a battlefield. Be prepared." He wasn't wrong. As news of Lila's breakthrough spread, her inbox filled with partnership proposals, some promising collaboration, others veiled attempts to wrest control from her hands. Among them was a name she hadn't expected to see, Richard Statham. His email was short and to the point. "Let's discuss. Call me." Lila stared at the screen, her emotions a mixture of triumph and disdain. Statham's dismissal of her work had been the catalyst for everything that followed. And now, when her invention had gained global acclaim, he wanted a seat at the table. She ignored the email, focusing instead on her next steps. In the weeks that followed, Lila worked tirelessly to finalize her prototype for large-scale production. Her lab buzzed with activity, each milestone bringing them closer to realizing her vision. But the more progress she made, the more she felt the weight of the opposition mounting. One afternoon, as she reviewed manufacturing plans with her team, Priya approached her with a concerned expression. "Lila, we've got a problem," she said, holding up a tablet. "Statham Enterprises just announced a new solar technology that's eerily similar to ours." Lila's stomach dropped. "What do you mean, similar?" Priya tapped the screen, pulling up a press release from Statham's company. It detailed a solar panel system boasting high efficiency and advanced photonic materials. The accompanying image bore a striking resemblance to Lila's prototype. "How did they get this?" Lila asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. "We haven't shared our designs with anyone outside this team." Priya hesitated. "I don't know, but if they're this far along, it means they've been working on it for a while." Lila's mind raced, piecing together the implications. Statham hadn't just dismissed her. He had likely stolen her ideas, or at least enough to mimic them. The thought was infuriating, but also oddly motivating. "We'll deal with it," she said firmly, her resolve hardening. "If Statham wants a fight, we'll give him one." Lila's response to Statham's announcement was swift. She scheduled a press conference to unveil her prototype's updated design and officially announce its move into production. The event was broadcast live, drawing an even larger audience than the Global Tech Summit. With calm precision, she showcased her invention's superiority, countering Statham's claims with undeniable data and a clear roadmap for implementation. As the cameras flashed and reporters clamored for questions, Lila felt a surge of confidence. She wasn't just defending her work. She was asserting her place in an industry that had tried to exclude her. That evening, Lila returned to her apartment, exhausted but exhilarated. She poured herself a glass of wine and sank into the couch, scrolling through the flood of messages and social media reactions. Among the congratulatory notes was another email from Statham. "I underestimated you. Let's talk." Lila stared at the message, her thoughts swirling. She had dreamed of this moment, the man who had dismissed her as irrelevant now seeking her out, acknowledging her brilliance. But as satisfying as it was, she knew better than to trust him. The world was beginning to see what she had always believed. Her invention wasn't just a product. It was a catalyst for change. And as she set her glass down, a small smile tugging at her lips, she knew one thing for certain. Richard Statham had made his move. Now it was her turn. The conference room buzzed with tension. At the head of the table sat Richard Statham, his sharp features set in a scowl as he glared at the screen in front of him. The headlines were relentless, each one driving a knife deeper into his carefully curated image. Energy revolution. Lila Brooks' breakthrough threatens industry titans. David versus Goliath. Former employee challenges Statham Enterprises with game-changing technology. His inner circle sat in uncomfortable silence, waiting for the storm they knew was coming. Finally, Statham leaned back in his chair, his piercing blue eyes scanning the room like a predator assessing weakness. "How?" he said slowly, his voice dangerously calm. "Did this happen?" The question hung in the air, daring anyone to answer. After a few moments of silence, Martin, his chief strategist, cleared his throat. "Sir, it's clear that Dr. Brooks has built something significant." The public response to her prototype. Public response. Statham snapped, his voice rising. "This isn't about public response, Martin. It's about control. She's taken what should have been our technology and turned it into a weapon against us." "She didn't steal anything," Martin said cautiously. "You terminated her project and her employment." Statham's glare turned icy. "I underestimated her. Yes, that was my mistake. But it's one I intend to rectify." Lila was unaware of the turmoil brewing at Statham Enterprises as she sat in her bustling lab. The team was hard at work, fine-tuning the production models for her invention. Every day brought new challenges, from securing supply chains to troubleshooting manufacturing glitches, but Lila thrived in the chaos. For the first time in years, she felt fully alive, her passion fueling her every move. That afternoon, she called her team together for an impromptu meeting. "I have some news," she began, her tone cautious. "We've received a formal request from the Department of Energy to present our technology at their annual summit." Excited murmurs spread through the room. The DOE Summit was a coveted platform, drawing the brightest minds in science and the most powerful policymakers. It was a chance to showcase their work on a national stage. "This is our opportunity to cement our place in the industry," Lila continued, her gaze sweeping the room. "But it also means the pressure is on. We need to be flawless." The team responded with enthusiasm, their collective energy driving them forward. For Lila, it was a reminder of how far they had come. Her vision was no longer just hers. It was shared by everyone in that room. Meanwhile, Statham was assembling his own plan. If Brooks was determined to challenge him, he would fight back with every resource at his disposal. He called for a meeting with his legal team, their presence in his office signaling a new level of aggression. "We need to find a way to undermine her," Statham said, pacing the length of his office. "Patents, contracts, non-disclosure agreements. There has to be something we can use to tie her up in court." One of the lawyers, a wiry man with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, spoke up. "We've reviewed the termination agreements and project records. There's no evidence she violated any terms." Statham's eyes narrowed. "Then dig deeper. If she took even a single idea that originated here, we'll bury her." The legal team exchanged uneasy glances but nodded. In Statham's world, failure wasn't an option. As the DOE summit approached, Lila found herself battling a new kind of pressure. The media frenzy surrounding her invention had reached fever pitch, with reporters camping outside her lab and speculation about her technology's potential dominating headlines. She had never sought the spotlight, but now she had no choice but to navigate it. One evening, as she prepared for a television interview, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an article from a major business outlet. Statham Enterprises to file suit against Lila Brooks. Her heart sank as she read the details. The article claimed that Statham was preparing a legal challenge, alleging that her invention was based on proprietary information developed during her time at his company. It was a blatant attempt to undermine her, but the potential consequences were dire. "Lila," Robert Kingston said, entering the room with a calm but serious expression, "we need to talk." She looked up, her mind racing. "You've seen it?" He nodded, taking a seat across from her. "This is a scare tactic. Statham knows he doesn't have a case, but he's banking on tying you up in legal battles long enough to stall your progress. So what do we do?" she asked, trying to keep the frustration out of her voice. Kingston leaned forward, his tone measured. "We fight. You've done nothing wrong, and the world knows it. But we have to be smart. No public statements, no reaction. Let him make the first move." Lila nodded, trusting his judgment. But as she prepared for the interview, she couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was only beginning. The DOE Summit was a turning point in every sense. Lila's presentation was met with overwhelming enthusiasm, her invention hailed as a transformative breakthrough. Policymakers, scientists, and industry leaders lined up to speak with her, each one eager to be part of the revolution she was spearheading. But as she basked in the success of the day, an unexpected figure appeared in the crowd, Richard Statham. He approached her with the confidence of a man who had never known failure, his sharp suit and piercing gaze cutting through the room's celebratory atmosphere. "Dr. Brooks," he said smoothly, extending a hand. "Congratulations on your success." Lila stared at him, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Statham, I didn't expect to see you here." "I wouldn't miss it," he said, his tone laced with something she couldn't quite place. "It's not every day one of my former employees achieves something of this magnitude." She resisted the urge to bristle at his words, forcing a polite smile. "Thank you. Though I imagine this isn't just a social call." Statham chuckled, a low, calculated sound. "Always perceptive. I believe we have unfinished business, Dr. Brooks. Perhaps we can discuss it over dinner." Lila's smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened. "I'm afraid I'll have to decline. My schedule is rather full." Statham's expression flickered for a moment, but he recovered quickly. "Another time, then. I look forward to it." As he walked away, Lila felt a surge of determination. Statham might have underestimated her once, but she wouldn't let him do it again. The summit had cemented her place in the industry, and no legal threats or veiled overtures could change that. That night, as she stood on the balcony of her hotel room overlooking the city, Lila allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The journey had been grueling, but every challenge had only strengthened her resolve. Statham might be a powerful adversary, but she had something he lacked, a vision rooted in purpose, not profit. The turning point had arrived, and Lila was ready for whatever came next. The Grand Convention Center was a hive of activity, its expansive halls thrumming with anticipation. The International Tech and Innovation Expo was in full swing, and this year, all eyes were on one exhibit, Lila Brooks' revolutionary energy system. From reporters clutching notepads to industry leaders whispering amongst themselves, the atmosphere buzzed with a singular question. Was this invention truly the game-changer it claimed to be? Lila stood backstage, adjusting the lapel of her sleek charcoal blazer. The moment felt surreal. Just months ago, she'd been ousted from her job, her project deemed irrelevant. Now, she was about to introduce her breakthrough to the world. She glanced at Robert Kingston, who stood beside her, his calm demeanor a steadying force. "Ready?" he asked, handing her a bottle of water. "As I'll ever be," she replied, taking a quick sip. She adjusted the microphone on her collar, took a deep breath, and stepped out onto the stage. The audience erupted into applause as Lila approached the podium, her prototype displayed prominently on a pedestal to her right. Its sleek design, encased in transparent panels to reveal its intricate mechanisms, seemed almost alive under the spotlight. She paused, letting the applause die down, and scanned the room. Rows of journalists, industry experts, and potential investors stared back at her, their curiosity palpable. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "I'm here today to introduce a technology that I believe will redefine how we think about energy." With a click of her remote, the screen behind her lit up, displaying a graph. For decades, solar energy has been constrained by efficiency limits, what we call the theoretical maximum. Today, I'm proud to announce that we've shattered that ceiling. She gestured to the prototype, the lights on its surface glowing softly. This is the Spectra system, a hybrid technology that uses nanophotonic materials to capture light across the entire solar spectrum, including wavelengths traditional panels can't harness. In real-world conditions, it achieves an unprecedented 92% energy conversion efficiency. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Cameras flashed as journalists scrambled to jot down notes. Lila continued, her confidence building with every word. She explained the system's adaptability, its potential to power urban grids and remote villages alike, and its scalability for global impact. "What we have here," she concluded, "isn't just a product, it's a solution. A step toward a sustainable future that's no longer a distant dream but an immediate possibility." The room erupted into applause, louder and more sustained than before. Lila stepped back, allowing the crowd to absorb the magnitude of what they just witnessed. As questions poured in, she handled each one with precision, her knowledge and passion shining through. As the expo continued, Lila's exhibit became the centerpiece of the event. Crowds gathered to see the Spectra system up close, industry leaders extended invitations to exclusive meetings, and journalists clamored for interviews. Yet amidst the frenzy, Lila felt a simmering undercurrent of tension. "Lila," Robert said, pulling her aside as the day wound down, "we've got a problem." "What is it?" she asked, her stomach tightening. He handed her a tablet displaying a breaking news alert. Statham Enterprises unveils rival solar technology. The article detailed Statham's sudden announcement of a new product, one that claimed similar efficiency levels and utilized advanced photonic materials. The timing was no coincidence. It was a calculated move to undermine her moment in the spotlight. "They're scrambling," Robert said. "This is a desperation play." Lila frowned, reading the article. "They're trying to frame it as a race. But this isn't a competition, it's theft." Robert nodded grimly. "We expected this. The question is, how do you want to respond?" The next day, Lila held an impromptu press conference at the expo. Flanked by her team and the Spectra system prototype, She addressed the growing media storm surrounding Statham's announcement. "I'm aware of the recent claims made by Statham Enterprises," she began, her tone calm but firm. "Let me be clear. The Spectra system was developed independently with no connection to my previous employer. The technology behind it is protected by patents, and we will not tolerate any attempts to undermine its integrity." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Innovation thrives on competition, but it must be fair and ethical. I remain focused on bringing this technology to the world, and I trust the public will see through any attempts to distract from its impact." Her statement was met with applause from the gathered crowd, and the media coverage that followed largely painted her as the underdog standing firm against corporate intimidation. The tide was turning in her favor. Later that evening, Lila returned to her hotel room, exhaustion weighing on her like a heavy cloak. She sank into the armchair by the window, staring out at the city lights. The day had been a triumph, but Statham's actions were a stark reminder of the battle still ahead. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Priya, holding a tablet with a triumphant smile. "You need to see this." Lila took the tablet and scanned the screen. It was a live feed from a financial news network, and the headline made her sit up straight. "Statham Enterprises faces backlash over alleged intellectual property misuse." The segment detailed how public opinion had shifted against Statham, with former employees and industry insiders coming forward to accuse the company of unethical practices. One whistleblower, a former project manager, had provided documents suggesting that Statham's new technology was rushed to market based on incomplete data, a stark contrast to the meticulously tested Spectra system. Lila felt a mix of vindication and relief. The truth was emerging, and it was clear the world was beginning to see through Statham's tactics. By the end of the expo, Lila's invention had secured partnerships with global energy companies and garnered the attention of environmental organizations eager to deploy the Spectra system in underserved regions. Her vision was becoming a reality, and the momentum was unstoppable. As she packed her things to leave the convention center, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway, Richard Statham. His once confident demeanor was noticeably subdued, his sharp features shadowed by exhaustion. "Dr. Brooks," he said, his voice devoid of its usual arrogance. "May I have a word?" Lila set her bag down, crossing her arms. "What do you want, Mr. Statham?" He hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "I underestimated you. I'll admit that. But we're both in this industry for the same reason, to push boundaries. Perhaps there's a way we can collaborate." The audacity of his offer made Lila laugh, a sharp, humorless sound. "Collaborate? After everything you've done to discredit me?" "I made mistakes," Statham said, his tone softening. "But you have to admit, our combined resources could take this technology further than you ever imagined." Lila stared at him, her gaze unwavering. "I don't need your resources, Mr. Statham. What I need is integrity, something you seem to have forgotten along the way." Before he could respond, she picked up her bag and walked past him, leaving him standing alone in the doorway. For Lila, the path forward was clear. She didn't need Statham's validation or his partnership. Her invention would stand on its own, powered by a vision too big for corporate greed. The world was changing, and this time, it was Lila Brooks leading the charge. The sprawling boardroom of Statham Enterprises was eerily silent, the tension suffocating. Richard Statham sat at the head of the long, polished table, staring at the documents spread before him. For the first time in his career, he felt the weight of genuine defeat. Across the table, his legal team shifted uncomfortably under the weight of his glare. "So," Statham said, his voice low and measured, "you're telling me that our so-called innovation has been exposed as a rushed imitation?" One of the lawyers, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a perpetually nervous demeanor, adjusted his glasses. "Yes, sir. The whistleblower's testimony has gained traction. It's damaging." "Damaging?" Statham's voice rose, his frustration spilling over. "It's catastrophic. Do you understand what this does to our credibility?" The lawyer opened his mouth to respond but thought better of it, his silence more telling than words. Statham leaned back in his chair, pinching the bridge of his nose. The media backlash had been swift and merciless, painting Statham Enterprises as a greedy monolith willing to cut corners to maintain dominance. His company's stock had plummeted, investors were demanding answers, and all the while, Lila Brooks' invention continued to dominate headlines. It wasn't just about the technology. It was about perception. Lila had become the embodiment of integrity and innovation, while Statham had become a cautionary tale of corporate greed. And for the first time in his life, Richard Statham didn't have a strategy to claw his way back. Across town, in the bustling lab that had become her second home, Lila Brooks was unaware of the storm swirling at Statham Enterprises. Her focus was on the future. The Spectra system had reached its final development stage, and production facilities were being established around the globe. Yet, even amidst her success, Lila felt the constant pull of responsibility. She sat at her desk late into the evening, poring over a proposal from an environmental nonprofit. They wanted to deploy her technology in rural areas of sub-Saharan Africa, where access to reliable energy was still a distant dream. It was exactly the kind of impact Lila had envisioned when she first conceived the Spectra system. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She looked up to see Robert Kingston leaning against the frame, a small smile on his face. "Working late again?" "Always," Lila replied, gesturing for him to come in. "What's up?" Robert entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you'd like to know. Statham Enterprises just issued a public apology." Lila raised an eyebrow, surprised. "An apology? From Statham?" "Not just any apology," Robert said, handing her one of the cups. "They've admitted to rushing their product to market and acknowledged that their actions undermined ethical innovation. It's a complete 180 from their usual arrogance." Lila sipped her coffee, her expression thoughtful. "Damage control. They're trying to salvage what's left of their reputation." "Maybe," Robert agreed, "but it's also a sign that you've won. Statham is on the ropes because of what you've accomplished." Lila nodded, but the victory felt strangely hollow. She had never set out to defeat Statham. Her goal had always been to bring her vision to life. Still, the shift in the balance of power was undeniable. The next morning, Lila was surprised to receive an unexpected visitor. She was in the middle of a meeting with her team when one of the lab assistants entered, looking hesitant. "Dr. Brooks, there's someone here to see you." "Who is it?" Lila asked, glancing at her watch. Her schedule for the day was packed, and she didn't have time for interruptions. "It's Richard Statham," the assistant said quietly. The room fell silent, the weight of the name hanging in the air. Lila exchanged a look with Priya, who shrugged, her curiosity evident. With a sigh, Lila stood and made her way to the reception area. Statham was waiting, his usual commanding presence subdued. He looked older, the stress of recent weeks etched into the lines of his face. When he saw Lila, he offered a small, tentative smile. "Dr. Brooks," he said, extending a hand. "Thank you for seeing me." Lila hesitated but shook his hand, her expression guarded. "What brings you here, Mr. Statham?" He glanced around the reception area, his discomfort evident. "I was hoping we could talk privately." Lila led him to a small conference room, closing the door behind them. She took a seat across from him, folding her arms. "You have 5 minutes." Statham nodded, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. For a moment, he seemed at a loss for words, an unfamiliar vulnerability creeping into his demeanor. Finally, he spoke. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "When I dismissed you and your work, I was wrong. I didn't see the potential, and I underestimated you. That was my mistake, and it's cost me more than I care to admit." Lila stared at him, her expression unreadable. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I've realized that what you've created isn't just a technological breakthrough, it's a testament to your resilience and vision. And I regret the role I played in trying to undermine that." Lila leaned back in her chair, studying him carefully. "What do you want, Mr. Statham?" Statham hesitated, then sighed. "Nothing. No deals, no partnerships. I just wanted you to know that I see now what I couldn't see then. And I'm sorry." For a moment, Lila didn't respond. She had dreamed of this moment, of hearing Statham admit his mistakes. But now that it was here, it felt strangely anticlimactic. His apology didn't erase the struggles she had endured or the battles she had fought to prove herself. "Thank you for saying that," she said finally, her tone measured. "But I didn't succeed because of you. I succeeded in spite of you. Remember that?" Statham nodded, his expression resigned. "I will." As he stood to leave, Lila watched him go, her emotions a mixture of vindication and closure. She had built her success brick by brick, overcoming obstacles that would have broken others. And while Statham's regret was satisfying, it was her own determination that had carried her here. That evening, as she returned to her work, Lila felt a profound sense of clarity. Her journey had been shaped by challenges, but it was those very challenges that had forged her into the innovator she had become. And as she looked toward the future, she knew that her story was only just beginning. The morning sunlight streamed through the large windows of the new production facility, casting a golden glow over the state-of-the-art equipment. Lila Brooks stood on the observation deck, looking down at the bustling activity below. Engineers in white lab coats moved with precision, their focus on the assembly lines that were producing the first batch of spectra systems for global distribution. It was a sight Lila had imagined countless times, but never truly believed she'd witness. This wasn't just a lab or a prototype anymore. This was a full-scale operation, the culmination of years of work, sacrifice, and relentless determination. The world was finally about to feel the impact of her invention. As she watched, Robert Kingston joined her, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "It's something, isn't it?" he said, handing her one. "More than something," Lila replied, her voice tinged with awe. "It's everything." Robert nodded, a rare softness in his expression. "The first shipments are scheduled for next week. You're officially changing the world, Dr. Brooks." She smiled at the title, one she had earned through grit and perseverance. "It's surreal, but it's also just the beginning." The weeks that followed marked a whirlwind of milestones. The Spectra system rolled out to initial pilot sites, including rural communities in Africa, densely populated cities in Asia, and industrial hubs in Europe. The results were beyond even Lila's expectations. Energy costs dropped dramatically, and access to reliable power expanded in ways that were both practical and transformative. Media outlets dubbed it the Spectra Revolution, and Lila found herself at the center of a global movement. Interviews, panels, and conferences became part of her daily routine, each one a platform to advocate for sustainable energy and equitable access. Despite her newfound celebrity, Lila remained grounded, her focus always on the technology and its potential to make a difference. One such moment came during a visit to a remote village in Kenya. As Lila stepped off the helicopter, she was greeted by a group of children who had gathered to see the woman behind the invention that had brought electricity to their homes for the first time. Their laughter and curiosity were infectious, and Lila felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. "Dr. Brooks," said an older man who introduced himself as the village elder, "your work has brought light to our nights and power to our days. We can never thank you enough." Lila shook his hand, her eyes shining with emotion. "It's not just my work," she said. "It's the work of an incredible team and the belief that change is possible." Back in the corporate world, the ripples of her success continued to disrupt the status quo. Major energy companies scrambled to adapt, with many reaching out to Lila for partnerships. Her firm but fair terms, rooted in sustainability and accessibility, set a new standard for ethical innovation. Among those companies was Statham Enterprises. Despite their earlier public apology, their attempts to recover from the fallout of their rushed product launch had been only partially successful. Investors were wary, and the company's reputation was still fragile. In a bold move, they approached Lila with a formal proposal to collaborate. The meeting took place in a neutral location, a sleek, glass-walled conference room overlooking the city. Statham himself was present, his demeanor more subdued than the last time they'd met. "Dr. Brooks," he began, his tone measured, "thank you for taking the time to meet with us." Lila nodded but said nothing, allowing him to continue. "We recognize that our past actions have created tension," Statham said, "but we also see an opportunity to align our resources with your vision. Together, we could scale your technology even further, reaching markets that would otherwise take years." She leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "And what would you gain from this alignment?" Statham hesitated, then sighed. "Redemption." and a chance to be part of something that matters. Lila studied him for a moment. He seemed genuine, but she knew better than to take his words at face value. "I'll consider your proposal," she said finally, "but my priority is the integrity of this technology. If I see even a hint of compromise, the deal's off." Statham nodded, his relief visible. "Understood." As the meeting ended, Lila felt a sense of closure. The man who had dismissed her, belittled her work, and tried to undermine her had now come to her as a supplicant. It wasn't a victory she had sought, but it was one she wouldn't ignore. Months later, as Lila stood on the stage at the Global Sustainability Summit, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The crowd of thousands hung on her every word as she delivered the keynote address, her voice filled with conviction. "We stand at the cusp of a new era," she said. "An era where innovation is guided not by greed, but by purpose. The Spectra system isn't just a technological breakthrough. It's proof that we can solve the world's greatest challenges when we dare to dream boldly and act decisively." The applause was deafening, but Lila barely registered it. Her mind was already on the future. The next challenge, the next breakthrough, the next opportunity to make a difference. As the summit concluded, she stepped outside into the crisp evening air. The stars were bright, their light unyielding against the darkness. Lila took a deep breath, a quiet smile on her face. She had proven to the world, and to herself, that resilience and vision could overcome even the greatest obstacles. And this was only the beginning.